was that your question sort of about the topic, or?
No, my question is, I would like to learn from everybody how in your different organizations you ensure the communication from the sales team to the onboarding team, so nothing will fall between the cracks and the customer will feel that doesn't need to tell the story again. It's like, if not every time that there is a handshake, it's like information is lost and the customer feels like he needs to tell the whole story again. And that creates frustration. So what I would like to hear from you guys is, in each step that the different team is taking over, how in your organizations you ensure that the information is not lost.
Okay, great. Other questions? Alex, you had a question? Alex Farmer?
Yes, hello everybody. It's adjacent to that question, so maybe it's a two-parter, but I think there's a lot of attention paid to when in the pipeline, either pre-sale or post-sale, different roles are introduced. So I guess, the first part of the question, Mariano, is, what are the different roles? And then the follow-up is, and for those roles, when are they introduced and why, is what I'd love to find out from the group. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I'm just writing these down. And then if you could lower your hands after you talk, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Josh Whitcraft.
Hey everyone, I'd love to know what is a hard and fast rule versus best practice. So what are the must-haves for an implementation team to pass on to CSM versus things that are general kind of recommended? And how do you govern the things that are required?
Awesome. And David Williams.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I think we're one of the few organizations that serves enterprise customers that still has the onboarding and implementation function and the success function merged into the same person. And I would like to shortly grow and mature into a implementation and onboarding function that is separate from the success function. So I would love to hear from others who have gone through that same maturation process from a single jack of all trades person who does both things to doing both separately, and how they managed to make that happen. How did they convince leadership that it was worth investing in a separate team of folks to do that versus having the efficiency of a single group that handles both functions? Does that make sense, Cheryl?
It does. Thank you very much. That's a very good question. And especially with enterprise customers, right? You got to handle that carefully. I'm just going to get a few more questions and we'll go into answers. Ashram, I'm pretty sure.
That's me, Austin.
Austin, okay. Yeah, I could totally get that.
I've been called much worse than that, so that's fine. One of the ideas that my organization is interested in exploring is the idea of a success plan. We have different handoffs between the sales, the onboarding, and the success team, but want to keep the customer their goals in mind and not have that information get lost across the different handoffs, particularly for the high value enterprise customers. But we're kind of struggling on if you start with your current folks in the pipeline, do you pilot with your existing enterprise customers? And I would love to learn how you guys have solved that and what's worked well for you, or if you even recommend doing that.
That's awesome. Okay. And then if you could unraise your hand, that would be great. And I'm gonna take one more question, Ron.
Hey guys, happy Thursday. I think it's related to all so these are phenomenal topics, by the way, and questions, because we've all wrestled with these at various points in our life cycle, no pun intended. But I think related to the first question was around what are the technology and tools that we use and can use, whether, you know, Salesforce, Gainsight, et cetera. What are good tools to use for making sure we got clear process, no lost documents, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, awesome. And then if you could lower your hand, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to go back and we're going to start answering the questions. So if you have, if you want to jump in with an answer, if you could raise your hand. And the first question really from Mariano is, and it's starting a little bit earlier in the process. So it's, you know, how are you ensuring communication from sales to the onboarding team, to the CSM? How are you making sure that, you know, that information's not getting lost? So what are the processes around that? Mariano, did that encompass your question?
Yes, totally. And also having in consideration that sometimes there are like iterations, because the sales team also gets in the picture, and also there is maybe something that needs to be on board. So it's like different teams are all the time going in and out.
Excellent.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you so much.
Cool. So I see Andreas, you had your hand up to answer this.
Yes. Hi, good morning, everyone. In order to ensure that consistency, typically the CSM who manages the account is introduced by the sales team when you reach a certain qualification threshold. So whatever that is in your process, 70, 80%, when most of the goals and objectives are baked. So that's the discussion around the desired outcomes and what are the next steps, and the transition are basically seamless. And then from a post-sales perspective, the CSM in various degrees of involvement stays with the client. So if there is a dedicated implementation team, if you have onboarding and training specialists or whatever that is during the sales cycle, is always at the forefront of the other objectives, so that even if you have these iterations, right, that you alluded to, that it's not out, I throw it over the fence to this other team, which is what most of us have seen many times in their lives, and in the throwing, a lot of things get dropped, and the customer gets confused, frustrated, and success is not guaranteed anymore. So that's the approach that I have been using. Now for small teams, when even with enterprise where you don't have the luxury of breaking it out into the multiple roles, then the CSM may also play more dedicated other functions than being kind of the conductor of this big orchestra of other folks.
Okay, and I just have a quick follow-on question, because it sounded like what you said was you introduced your CSM at, you know, basically when an opportunity hit 70 or 80%. So do you ever have, is that for just a certain threshold of ARR? Or like, do you ever basically introduce the CSM, get them involved, and then the deal falls out? Or is it far enough along there that enough percentage of the time, you know, nobody's time is wasted?
Well, if you have already qualification from a sales process, again, depending which methodology and how you set up Salesforce or whatever your CRM tool is, then you're like, yes, we like each other, we understand the business value, and now it's more about the execution of contracts and the funding and other type of things. So the likelihood of something falling off like you have in an early stage deal is lower. But of course, it's only at a 70% or 80% chance, so success is not yet guaranteed. And that could be the case Again, the CSM is not involved in like every discussion, every meeting, but if there is a high level presentation, for example, a call with the executive sponsor, and then the CSM gets introduced so that they already start forming that type of partnership. So
Got
it's a
it.
bit of a risk, but it avoids having to go to the 100% and then saying like, okay, I'm done here. I throw my hands up. Thank you very much. I got my commission, and what the other team is doing, I don't care. I mean, you know, very sarcastic, simplified. So.
Right. Okay, cool. And then if you could lower your hand, that'd be great. And I'm sorry to keep asking.
Thank you.
Christy.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so just to, obviously, Andreas, a lot of the points that you hit on emulate a lot of what we've built in as well. So we do things a little bit different though in the pre-sales process. So what I've done is I've enabled the sales team on a very specific talk track on how to position customer success. We do leverage this as a core differentiator for us in our industry, because not every competitor that we have is really building out CS the way that we have. So it is something it's very different for us. In that conversation, though, we're really anchoring on all the information that we're going to collect and gather. So what it helps us do is make sure that the salesperson at the close of a deal has all the required information. So everything around their goals, their use cases, the competitive landscape, challenges, you know, objections, things that they're trying to solve for, right? So all the stuff that we would collect to have an effective kickoff is being teed up in that introduction to what customer success does. Now, as the follow-on to that, we also have in Salesforce a very prescriptive object that's been created as our post-sale handoff. So it is a series of fields that live in our CRM that an AE cannot close a deal unless those fields are all completed thoroughly. And so our VP of sales will happily reject any deal from closing if everything is not thoroughly completed. And he and I have gone through a series of audits around those to make sure that we are all aligned on what good looks like. Now, once the deal closes, we've got all that built in the CRM. So that all lives there for us. And then following that, the AE will introduce our CSM. CSM also loops in onboarding in their response, but we do an internal formal handoff. It's a 60-minute conversation where we go and step by step, each of those line items, we go through everything that's been put into Salesforce. It's our opportunity to ask questions, do a deeper dive on that to make sure that everyone in the team, which is our onboarding team, customer success, sales, and our solutions team, all have a great understanding of what the customer is trying to do with our solution, what success will look like, what are the challenges and obstacles that we're going to try to overcome together. And then we use all of that information to build our kickoff deck. Customer success is required to build the customer kickoff deck. Our kickoff meeting, though, is with onboarding, sales, CS, SE. So we're all coming together to really have that formal handoff from the customer, from the sales team to the customer success team. And so we found that motion and rhythm not only helps to make sure that all of our team is aligned and that we're having the appropriate conversations, right? There is not a moment where we're asking the customer questions. We're asking them to reconfirm, right? Like, here is what we've heard during this process, because no one likes to repeat themselves. So it's just getting them to confirm, is this accurate, right? Are these still the things that we're working on together? And that deck is really simple. It's really streamlined. It's less than 20 slides. And we do take about an hour to go through it with our customers. But I will tell you, this motion, our customers are singing our praise afterwards. They are thrilled that we've got everything documented. Following that meeting, we send the deck with any updates over back to our customers. And that's also the framework that we use for our post-onboarding review. So after onboarding is concluded, the CS team is also leading a post-onboarding review with the onboarding team. Sales is optional at that stage. And basically what we do is we go back to that initial deck and say, are the things that we discussed, are you set up to achieve these goals with your current infrastructure, with your current deployment? Right? Obviously, they didn't achieve their goals because goals will take a while to get there, that ROI. But do they feel like they are properly trained and enabled on the product? They feel like they've got the framework to now start to leverage the software in a meaningful way to drive to those goals. And that infrastructure really helps to make sure that, one, documents all the information, lives in a CRM, it's there in perpetuity. All of our documentation is added in Gainsight and in Salesforce. So it lives on the op record and it lives on our C360 in Gainsight. So we've got all that living there forever. Our customers feel really good. We use these decks. Again, there's certain slides, like our goals slide, that will be inserted in everything along the journey. So our EBRs, everything kind of goes back to the initial things that we discussed and that they confirmed. So it's just, it has that continuity and flow. And there's not one person in our organization who doesn't know what our customers need to be successful.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And then if you could also lower your hand. And then Andrew, you had your hand up for a while. Hopefully it's for this.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hey there.
Hey, everybody. So Andreas, Christy, spot on. Love it. Andreas, getting CS engaged earlier in the sales cycle. 100% agree. It's a best practice, especially in the enterprise. Christy, loved the stick approach. I mean, we want to use the carrot whenever possible, but love the stick approach of, hey, you can't get paid on this until you supply us with the information that we need to not look stupid in front of our customer, in front of this new customer, because there's nothing worse than when your new customer gets handed over to customer success and you're asking a bunch of the same questions again. Now that plays into the question about, what are the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, right? The must-haves and the nice-to-haves, that information is absolutely everything that sales understands about that customer that we can then take with us and go in and validate, right? That we're not asking the right questions, and or that we're not asked, so we're not asking the wrong questions. And I go beyond that and touch on success plans, which we're, for those of you that are familiar with Success Hacker, we're huge fans of. You should be able to gather enough information from the sales process to be able to put together a draft success plan when you go into that initial meeting with a customer, potentially even introduce it at that point as, hey, here's our first stab at a success plan based off of what we know, and we've come in now just to validate what we know. So, and now we're going to work together to figure out, what that plan should be to help you all, to help you achieve your definition of success. So that's what I had to add, and I will lower my hand.
Thank you. And then I'm going to jump to, I see hands up still, but I'm going to jump to a new question. But I want to make sure, I believe that we also in all of those answers answered Alex Farmer's question as well. Alex, did you have any clarifications that you wanted?
All good. Let's move on. Thanks.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then I think I maybe touch on David's question around currently the organization. He's got CSM handling onboarding and success, looking to transition that to have two teams. And how have you all done that previously, if you have done that previously? And I see Ron has his hand up.
Hey guys, it's a great question. So when I joined my previous company, we had CSMs doing everything, training, support, onboarding, the success, all the different disciplines. The thing that we needed to do is, we had a sales team that was like, hey, regardless of the size of the deal, it's $8,000 for onboarding. And so pretty quickly putting some discipline and saying, no, we're going to start actually putting a proper scoping process around onboarding so that not one size fits all was a key step to start separating out and creating the revenue model that would support hiring a separate onboarding team. So that was kind of the first step, is to make sure that we had clear swim lanes on who's doing what, and that for the onboarding team that there was a specific scope that they could latch onto. And, so now we had 25,000, 30,000, sometimes 50,000 onboarding packages, depending on the complexity and sophistication. So that was the first step, is to make sure that there's clear swim lanes, roles, responsibilities, and handoffs between the two, and that there is a clear scope and model for, even if you're giving revenue, even if you're giving onboarding away as a value add or whatever, at least having a value associated with it, so you can associate the value with the team that's providing the services.
Okay, so you created a line item So even if it ended up being 0, there would be a value associated because there was a fee against it.
Correct. And a
Okay.
scope, and that way we could obviously track milestones and scope and all the things. So there's not, so just having a formal process around onboarding, which is a whole kind of separate topic. We, brought in Workfront as a project management tool. So that's just having that discipline around what are we going to be delivering in the onboarding was a key step to separating it out from a CS kind of led onboarding.
And I think part of the question was also like how you made the case to be able to, or how the case was made to be able to begin to hire a new team. And David, was that, are you looking from a like a volume perspective? Like, are you getting more and more accounts so you can't like do it with one team, or is it something where you want to be able to hire the different expertises so that you have CSMs, kind of focusing on their lane and onboarding team focusing on their lane?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both, Cheryl. We, as we've grown as a company and our capabilities have grown as well, there is now more required of the team to go achieve the outcomes that are now possible for our customers that weren't. So as we grow and as we get bigger and stronger, we now have a higher standard that we find ourselves being kept to, and more dollar amounts, and that always forces everyone to raise their game. What I really liked about what Ron had said there was, if you start line iteming for onboarding, it's going to force you to raise your game. If you have a budget line item for doing that, you now have money that's been allocated or tagged to that function, which is going to force you to put your money where your mouth is. And I loved doing that because right now we have all encompassing packages that it doesn't line item out what someone gets. So if we were to take a portion of that and assign it to the onboarding process, I think it's going to force a lot of great work on our end to improve the way we do things. And talk about making a case, there's your justification right there. If you have that amount of money now going towards onboarding, you have hard and fast numbers to work with your leadership on to say, this is what we've done this year, or this is what we're projecting we'll do, which changes the tenor of the conversation from anecdotal to data-driven. So I really like that.
Awesome.
The other thing I'll say, David, just as a adjunct to that, the other thing that we always struggled with was CSM saying, I don't have enough time to do X, Y, and Z. And so one of the things that Workfront allows us to do is do some time tracking. I know this can be the bane of existence. Obviously, it's not draconian Big Brother, but more productivity. And so when we were able to show executives that we're spending, pick a percentage, 40% of our time doing onboarding, that means that obviously there's less time that CSMs are doing client outcome related activities. So actually having some quantity that says, hey, I've got a CSM that we're paying, a decent amount of money who's spending X% of their time doing onboarding related activities. Do you, Mr. CEO, Ms. CEO, want that to be the case? I sure don't. So having some time metrics and data as well is also a good thing to have.
Awesome. And then Ron and David, if you guys could lower your hands, and sorry to ask, but I'm not, for whatever reason, I'm not able to lower this week. Excellent, thank you. And then Rod, did you have a response? It looks like you had your hand up for a little while. Did you have an answer for this?
Yeah, so I just wanted to echo the things that I've heard. I think the important thing in my mind is the roles and responsibilities. What does a CSM team do, right? If you position it that, when you onboard, that's, in my company, we had implementation services or onboarding services, right? It was a line item. And if the sales team, if the CSM gets to participate in closing the deal, you can position the role of CSM as, hey, this is the cruise director to make sure that you're going to have the maximum return on investment for your products and the services that you bought. And what you're seeing of bringing in an onboarding team is just the start, because as you go through the life cycle of our products and services, we're going to bring in specialists, right? And we're going to bring in an onboarding team to specialize in onboarding. It's a line item. It's in your scope of work. You know, after we've done the onboarding, I may bring in another specialist that may talk to you a little bit about the product and how to expand the usage of the product. I may bring in another specialist that may bring in, you know, some services that may be a specialist in a service. So in my mind, I think the key thing is answer the question, who's who in the zoo, right? When you're introducing yourself to the client, this is your CSM. The CSM is going to be the cruise director to ensure you have the best experience with our products and services. We're going to bring in subject matter expertise and having it as a line item. In my company, we had it as a line item, which I think I heard Ron talk about and maybe Christy. I think that's, in my mind, that's the best practice, but that, you know, to stress the point, the CSM is going to be with you through the life of your experience with our company. And you're married to the CSM. All these other people you're dating, right? It's a short-term relationship. The CSM is going to be here for the long haul. We're going to bring in subject matter expertise as appropriate. That's my thought.
Awesome. Thank you. And lower your hand. Thank you. Okay, so I want to get to Josh's question. You know, I think in terms of his question was around hard and fast rules to, you know, kind of what's required to hand off from the onboarding team to a CSM and how do you govern? You know, like how do you make sure that you have whatever the commitment was? And so there are hands raised. They've been up for a little while, but I'm going to call on you to answer this question. So hopefully you intended. If not, lower your hand. Thank you. See, David, we haven't heard from you yet today.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing great. So, you know, I agree with a lot of what everybody else said. What we do is in our customer journey map, we build overlaps so that we make sure the gaps are covered or overly covered, if you will. We also build a checklist of critical handoff information, and that handoff information, the criticalness of that is tied back to the contract, and we make sure that we actually have a line item for everything we're supposed to be delivering. That becomes the framework for the postmortem that I posted into the chat on what we do. We go back and we look at every line item and say, did we deliver it appropriately? Not only from our perspective, but we survey the customer in a broad way and ask them if we delivered it for them. And then we use that in our postmortem to say, what steps didn't we need? What steps did we need that weren't in here? And which steps could we have done faster, better, cheaper to decrease the time to value for the customer?
Okay, awesome. And then I think I want to put a follow on here. And I think it is more specific to Josh's question around, like, basically on the governance side, can a CSM say, this is not ready for handoff, right? So if the onboarding team, because, you know, we've talked a lot in previous, you know, I've seen a lot of comments about how, you know, support their you know, incented to close cases, but onboarding's incented, you know, around, you know, the time to value. And so sometimes, so can a CSM say, no, this isn't ready for me and give it back? Or like, do they have say in how is that controlled? Kevin, you've had your hand up for a while.
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that we do differently from my experience from when I went from Duetto to Ring Central is that the customer is kind of assigned an account executive and a professional service person that is actually with me throughout the entire journey, because we understand with our cycle that there are a lot of opportunities for them to incorporate new products, special API implementations and integrations that may come up. So we actually have a monthly meeting to discuss incoming new accounts as well as current accounts. And we talk about some of the things that were brought up during implementation that wasn't originally part of their original scope of work, that could potentially be another project that the customer would pay for in the future. And I would also start to build value propositions around that project, so that way we could start to realize some of the revenue that can come from those projects. Also, we talk about some of the things that the account executive has brought up in the past that had a little bit of traction, but they didn't necessarily pull the trigger on that particular product. So there's a concerted effort between professional services, customer success, and sales to be able to orchestrate that value proposition, particularly that all three of our departments are responsible for realizing revenue. So that's by all three of us owning that, we're constantly working on ways to be able to increase and expand the value of the account.
Okay. So does anybody have any process in place wherein the CSM can say it's not ready, like, don't hand it to me now, it's not ready? Like, is there a checklist there that the CSM, you know, goes through with the onboarding team? Christy, and then Kevin, can you lower your hand, please?
Hey, thanks. Yeah, so there's two things that we do. Obviously, I mentioned earlier that we do a post-onboarding review. It's the same thing as a BR that you would do with your customer. It's a formal meeting with them. So obviously, in anticipation of that meeting, CS and onboarding goes through a kind of basically the prerequisite, right? There's certain sessions, both from a training enablement and product configuration standpoint, that we need to make sure have been done. So depending on what products they've purchased, we know that there's certain things that need to be turned on. There's certain configurations that need to be built out. And from a use case perspective, we know that there's a certain setup, right, that they would need to have kind of built out in order for them to say, like, yes, I am successfully enabled to go now leverage this part of the product to drive value. So that audit process in advance of that customer meeting helps us have that internal checkpoint. And then when we do the review with the customer, it's the customer's opportunity to really lean in here and say, like, yes or no. And we don't advance the customer out of onboarding until we get the green light from the customer, right? When the customer says to us, like, yes, we feel good about our implementation, we feel like our end users have been properly trained, our company has been onboarded into the partnership effectively, and we're set up to go from here with our CSM, then that usually is the green light. There may be some gray area, right, where their customer expects certain things that weren't part of that initial agreement. And so that gray area obviously can muddy the waters a bit, but what we do try to do is make sure that we go back to the contract as part of that review process as well and say, here's what we agreed to out the gate, because it is part of our kickoff meeting. We review what they purchased and what we've agreed to. So any SOW work for custom development, anything in the product that has to be built out. So we have the ability to bring that back and say, well, here's what we agreed to early on. If there's additional work that needs to be done, are you comfortable working with your CSM on that? And assuming that they say yes to that, then we're able to proceed. It's very rare that we have to kick it back to onboarding. Our onboarding team is pretty diligent about checking all those boxes and making sure that we're set up to succeed. But if the customer does, we kind of defer back to what we initially agreed on in the kickoff. And then assuming that they're okay, we'll have the CSM lead any additional work that needs to be done.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. And then Phyllis, we haven't heard from you yet today. Phyllis.
Yep, I was just unmuting my thing, my cursor froze. No, Christy's nailed it. I mean, you know, she's covered it pretty well. You know, I didn't take my hand down. I should have taken it down. Once I heard her comments, there was not much I needed to add. It's just a process of communication, making sure you're documenting appropriately, and there shouldn't be an issue where you have to push back and say, we're not ready yet. That means that you're not communicating basically across teams and in your documentation, whatever CRM you're using. All that stuff has to align basically. And Christy pretty much laid that out. That's all I wanted to add.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Gretchen.
Yeah, just kind of from the opposite side, because I've actually, while I've been in CS, I've also been a customer on multiple occasions. And I think that when I've had success with onboarding teams, it's been because they've been set up properly. And I think Christy spoke to a lot of this, but making sure that the customer understands the reason we bring the specialist team in is because they actually touch every client we ever onboard. So they have a lot of best practices and learning that the CS team may not, because we're focused specifically on you. And so I think setting them up to be the experts and making sure that they're checking those boxes and bringing, you know, best practices and learnings from across the entire customer base is for me at least has always helped me understand why they're throwing more people at me instead of just letting my person handle me. So I think as long as you set it up correctly with those experts, it's always worked out fairly well for me.
Okay, cool, thank you. And then I see some hands still up, and then Gretchen, if you want to lower yours, thank you. And then, but I want to, there was one other question, and we've touched on it throughout, but I want to make it a little bit more explicit in terms of the role of success plans during this process. I believe, trying to see who asked that question. But somebody had asked the question about success plans, and different people have talked about it. So I'm just curious how you incorporate success plans, you know, in the handoff from either sales to onboarding to the CSM. And Andrew.
So what we've seen with a number of our clients is that success plan is developed by the CSM. The onboarding team is part of that, but onboarding is a piece of the success plan, because the success plan is something that, you know, we're looking and managing at more strategically. Right, so the onboarding piece is just it's a component of that. It's one of those milestones on the success plan. We're huge fans of the success plan, especially in the enterprise, because so much is at stake, and there's a lot of moving parts and moving pieces. And the success plan gets everybody on the same page. It drives accountability. It's a great way to share where you're at and the progress that you're making towards those desired outcomes. You know, we use and we teach the one-page success plan, which is ideal, especially for executives, stakeholders, power users that don't have necessarily a lot of time or focus to look at all the particulars about an implementation. So it's that long view. It's that much more strategic view of success. We have clients that have, I know that one of the questions was, do you do it with your new customers, do it with your existing customers? We have clients that have rolled it out. They've started rolling out to some of their existing customers that just got rave reviews about it. We have one client in particular that has uncovered hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in additional upsell and cross-sell opportunities by using the success plan. As an artifact that the entire, or you know, the customer and the vendor can focus on. I'm not sure if that answered the question fully, but all I wrote down was success plan for enterprise.
No, that's cool. And so we have like maybe 3 minutes, but there was one other question, if anybody wanted to throw out any answers. It was around the technology used by you all to track the deliverables. And I've heard Gainsight, and I've heard Salesforce, and documents that reside, and are required in each. Is there any other technology used with respect to this tracking and handoff of these? And okay, Andrew.
We've used and we've seen use things as simple as Google Google
Yeah.
Docs, Google Sheets, where you can collaborate. And for those that aren't Google shops now, Microsoft allows you to share documents, Microsoft Excel. So you can do it really low cost. The key is having that central repository. You know, we've had teams that have used that to use a Google Sheet as a repository of common information on the success plan, for example, where everybody lists common use cases, common key objectives, things like that. So Google and any sort of way that you can collaborate is always a good tool.
Sean.
I think you can mute him. Can you mute him? There he goes.
Okay, great. And then I saw Ron, you had asked that question. I see your hand up.
Yeah, so self-serving, right? So I think good to know about, Google's always been a standby for us. One of the things that we started doing was creating Slack channels for each customer onboarding. And, documents would still be in Sales first per some of our previous discussion, but creating a Slack channel with the onboarding and CS team so that there's, additional documentation and status and things that are popping in there was also helpful.
Okay, awesome. And it looks like we're being invited to return back to the main session. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all of the contributions and feedback.
How's everybody doing?
Great.
Jeff, I got to bounce. Nice to see you.
Good to
Talk
see
to
you.
you soon.
A few more filtering in. Kevin, good to see you. David, good to see you as well. I didn't get to see everybody earlier because my video's off. Austin, I see you down there with your beard, Austin Shrum.
What's up, Jeff?
How's it going? Perfect. And I think we've got Jay. Looks like we've got Cheryl back. Perfect. Well, we've got a few minutes left. Jay, let's start with you and maybe tell us a couple of the themes that came out in the discussion in the SMB room and maybe one key takeaway that you feel like the group can leave with.
Yeah, so again, our group is SMB focused, so smaller customers in general, and had some really interesting questions or challenges that came out. So one is like, how do you work with sales to get CSMs engaged even in the pre-sales phase, which I know is an enterprise level question or challenge as well. When is the right time to specialize? When do you start separating your implementation, project management, consulting type roles from your CSM and even support? We had a really interesting thing come out. Lauren Mecca talked about her strategy of basically starting with always when she's usually the first or second CSM to join a company. And when she does, her first play that she makes is to go get a temp with a soft cost associated with it to carve off all that reactive support work from her plate. And so there's a couple of benefits to that. One is it's a soft cost, so it's not bringing in a new headcount to the organization, so it's typically well received by the management team. And then she gets a chance to demonstrate what proactivity looks like. So for me, that was a big takeaway of our group and a good example of how you start to specialize very quickly, even in an early stage situation. And then we talked about doing everything, PMs who do everything versus who does the customer actually belong to? Who owns the relationship at what point in time? So we talked a little bit about whether sales should be introducing a project manager, and then project manager should be introducing a CSM at the end of that implementation cycle, or whether sales should be introducing the CSM and then being the quarterback and then bringing the PM in and and already having a relationship there for things that may come up during implementation. So really great discussion around that piece. It seems in our group where a lot of people are forming and trying to figure this out in real time right now. So it was really, really timely discussion. And then we started to get into talking about technologies that we're using to automate and scale onboarding. We didn't have a ton of time to get into a lot of a deep conversation about that, but we heard from one person that is working on scaling their long tail, which is 90,000 customers in their long tail. So
Wow.
they've got some cool challenges there. And then we heard a little bit about people using Pindo and some other tooling there. So those were some of the questions we got to in our group.
That's great. That's perfect. Cheryl, why don't you come off mute and talk a little bit about, same thing, a couple themes and maybe a takeaway that you heard from the enterprise group.
Yeah, so it's interesting, all of the questions sort of flowed from one to the other, and there's a lot of similarities between questions and between enterprise and what I just heard from Jay on the SMB side. The questions around, actually started from how do you ensure the right communication from sales? There were questions around success plans and how does that fit into the handoff process. And there were even questions around, which Jay had touched on, how do you start to break out if you have one person handling everything? How do you start to break out and have, two teams, and how do you justify that? And so, to your leadership team, so you can start to be adding that, and then tools and technology. What are people using? And it seems like many of the teams are charging for onboarding and have very clear deliverables. And Christy actually had a great process where the sales team can't actually market closed won until all of specific information has been provided as part of the handoff, and have a clear handoff process so that when you have the first call with the customer, and everybody pretty much sounds like they do this, the first call with the customer, you're confirming information rather than asking a lot of questions, so the customer feels heard, and they're not necessarily repeating themselves. And we are seeing on the enterprise side, the CSM is getting involved more towards the end, or at least the concept of what is customer success is being introduced during the sales process. So it's clear there's an understanding of what your CSM will be doing with you when the deal is closed.
That's great. I would expect nothing less from Christy. She normally has all of her ducks in a row, so I like that. Well, again, appreciate everybody spending an hour with us. I know this tends to fly by as the more and more that we do these, an hour doesn't seem like long enough. But we are going to respect everybody's time. We've got about a minute left. Just a couple of quick notes. Again, we're going to obviously be here next week, same time, 11:30. We're going to be looking at executive dashboards and thinking about that from an internal perspective. So trying to give you guys a little bit more time to maybe think and put some time into that topic, spread the word as well. And then in terms of our community launch, we're going to launch our online community in 2 weeks, June 11th. If you're curious now, if you're not already signed up, feel free to go to community.customerimperative.com, sign yourself up, go in there. There's been some great content. We have some really awesome contributors so far. Kevin Leonar, Christy Falterusto, Jeremy Donaldson's in there. Trying to think other people on the screen that I noticed. Dan Maldonado's in there. So there's really good stuff. And we're going to start launching that out to the public. So we're going to hopefully grow that. We started with 150 people. We've got about 4,000 ready to go next after that. So hopefully we're going to start to scale that and really get a diversity of opinions and voices. So appreciate everybody's time. We'll see you guys next week, and hope everybody has a great weekend.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you all.